The Hoosiers have a ton of talent on this year's roster, but how deep can we expect them to go once games really start to matter?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? It is Wednesday, October 26th. This is Locked On Hoosiers, your one and only daily one-stop shop for everything IU athletics. I'm your host, as always, Jacob Rude. Want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. Want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We've talked a lot about the Hoosiers, both kind of individually, as a team, what all that means. But when you look at the depth that they have, we've kind of talked about how this is going to be a team that probably going to run 10 deep during the regular season, which is rare, but I think this team is talented enough to do that. But what will those kind of 10 players look like? What are those two lineups going to look like? You obviously have your starting lineup, and in Mike Woodson's first season, he ran a lot of all-bench lineups. And credit to Zach Osterman at the Indy Star for writing a similar article to this. He kind of talked about the importance of the second group and how that's going to determine a lot with how successful Indiana is going to be this season. It was frustrating last season to watch those all-bench lineups with Rob Finney, Michael Durr, a struggling Tamar Bates, continue to be put out there and continue to just not perform at a high level. There's reason for optimism this year because I think there's more talent on that second unit, more talent overall in this IU team that hopefully can sustain that level of play throughout the full 40 minutes. If we're working on the assumption, as I think we are, that Xavier Johnson, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Miller Kopp, Race Thompson, Trayce Jackson-Davis are your starting five. I would expect that to be the starting five the first game of the season, maybe the first exhibition on Saturday. Then your second unit is probably going to look something like Tamar Bates, Trey Galloway, Jordan Geronimo, Malik Reneau, and Logan Duncombe, which is a talented group. Certainly sounds like Logan Duncombe is ready to kind of take a step forward in production this season. That's a talented group, but there's a couple flaws with those five players. I don't think that's a five-man group, barring injury or maybe foul trouble, that you're going to see take the court together next season. I'd be surprised, mainly because there's not a lot of ball handling in that group. Tamar Bates could be kind of a ball handler. Trey Galloway is like an emergency ball handler. We saw him play point guard in that Northwestern game. He ran backup point a little bit at times last year with Rob Finney's injuries. I don't suspect they're going to do that this season, mainly because they have two guys in Xavier Johnson and Jalen Hood-Schifino who are high-level point guards. And I think staggering them is what makes the most sense. So I think the solution to that is something I've mentioned a lot in one of your first subs, maybe your very first sub, being Tamar Bates, Trey Galloway, someone like that, to come in for Jalen Hood-Schifino, probably one of those two guys. And those guys can fit in with that starting lineup. It allows Jalen Hood-Schifino then, when he comes in, to sub in for Xavier Johnson. And at all times, one of those guys is going to be on the floor so that you always have a point guard on the floor. So instead of kind of being that five-man lineup, maybe it's something like Jalen Hood-Schifino, Tamar Bates, Jordan Geronimo, Reneau, and Duncombe. which is a lineup that makes more sense from a ball handling perspective, and shores up that kind of first issue. The second issue is harder to shore up, and that's just that second unit really lacks some shooting. You're going to be relying a lot on Jalen Hood-Schifino to take a step forward as a shooter from kind of his high school days. Tamar Bates to be a lot better shooter than he was last season. Jordan Geronimo to just be a lot more consistent shooting the three-pointer. We'll talk about him here in a bit. I don't think Malik Reneau or Logan Duncombe are going to be three-point threats. Malik Reneau talked about working on his three-pointer, but that hasn't been his game, so I'd be surprised if that was added to it this quickly. If the second unit struggles with that and doesn't have enough shooting, that could be a place where Caleb Banks or CJ Gunn steps in. You put them on the floor depending on how ready they are, how much their shot is translating as freshmen. And I would think that you would probably take Logan Duncombe out of that lineup. So it's Bates, Galloway, one of those freshmen, Banks or Gunn, Geronimo and Reneau as your 4 and 5. That's a little more modern lineup, a little bit smaller of a lineup, but with Banks and Gunn being kind of more wings, I think it's something you can get away with. And if they can provide some shooting, maybe that solves that issue. What is clear, though, is I've just mentioned 12 guys that I think can conceivably get on the court. That's not a luxury Indiana had last season, especially at the end of the year. That is not something you could say about Indiana, that they had 12 guys who could play real minutes last season. So I'm encouraged just in that alone. And I think this team is going to be able to go 10 deep. Now, when the big games come later in the season, you're not going to go 10 deep. Logan Duncombe's probably the first guy cut off in the rotation. Conceivably, you could go 9 deep. I think a lot of coaches typically settle around 8. Maybe you go with 9 guys. It's hard to figure out which of Bates, Galloway, Geronimo, Reneau that you would cut out. I don't think you would do any of them. Maybe in second halves we saw at times last year Miller Kopp didn't play as much. Maybe he's limited to just the kind of first half minutes or first rotation of the second half. I'm not sure how that would work, but you could dwindle it down a bit in the second half. The good news is we have an entire season to figure out who those best 8-9 guys are before we get to those big games. There's going to be, just by necessity, a little bit more kind of experimenting against a North Carolina, a Xavier, a Arizona, a Kansas, just to figure out what you have, what guys are ready for that moment, and what guys can handle playing in a game like that. So I'm excited about the depth Indiana has. There's a lot of guys and a lot of different looks that can take the floor this season. And again, that's not really something Indiana had last season, is that kind of versatility and flexibility in their lineup choices. Let's talk about Jordan Geronimo, one of the guys we mentioned. We're going to continue our season previews, talk about Geronimo, talk about Race Thompson, two forwards that are going to be important to the Hoosiers in different ways this season. But first, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the best access, or you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. I was just on LinkedIn today, actually on the jobs tab, looking at jobs. So there are millions and millions of people that use this. You can find or reach out, connect with those millions of people just by creating a job posting at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Then you can add your job in a purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Big thanks to all you guys for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, wherever you guys are listening to your podcasts at. Jordan Geronimo is a very interesting, fascinating player for the Hoosiers this season. There was some, I don't even want to say buzz. There was some, I guess, assumptions almost, or questions that he may leave during the offseason. He kind of quickly shut that down. Never felt like something that was really viable. But he was really important to Indiana in the postseason, especially that Wyoming game. He was really, really good. IU's second best player behind Trayce. He played really well later in the season, which should give a lot of optimism moving forward into this season. I think the biggest question that surrounds him is he a wing or is he a forward? He doesn't exclusively have to be one of those, but is he someone that you can play on the perimeter, match up against some of those bigger guards, while him still having the on-ball skills, the shooting ability to play as more of a three and play along two other bigs? Or is he someone that is just going to be a stretch four, which is kind of the role he played last year, a power forward that can move out to the three-point line and still hold his own rebounding? I suspect we'll see him in both roles. I mean, we just talked about it in the last section, how he could be, his versatility allows IU to kind of change some things up with what that second unit could look like. If he is a wing, it's very valuable to Indiana, and it could be more minutes for him because they don't really have a natural three. Miller Kopp plays there. I think he's more of a small ball four. Trey Galloway is an undersized three. I think he's better as a two, particularly defensively. Same with Tamar Bates. I think he's closer to a point guard than he is a small forward. So you kind of struggle to find guys that you would classify as a small forward. Now it's positionless basketball. It's modern basketball. You don't really classify anyone as a small forward, but you need wings. You need perimeter players. If Jordan Geronimo can be that, that's a huge thing for Indiana because they don't really have those types of guys. A lot of what's going to dictate if he is a wing is how good he can shoot the three-pointer. It was something he didn't do a lot of last year, so it's hard to kind of really know. He averaged less than an attempt per game, 29 attempts in 34 games. He only made 9 of them. If he can just be a knockdown corner three-point shooter, for example, that really changes a lot of things for him and for Indiana. They just need guys who can reliably knock down shots. And Jordan Geronimo, I think, could be one of those guys. He certainly seems to have the work ethic to do it. But he just is not someone. In 2 seasons, across 55 games, he shot 39 three-pointers. It's just not something he's done. I don't even expect him to necessarily be a high-volume shooter this year, but if his eyes are set on the NBA, physically he has the makeup to be a 3-and-D wing, but he struggled defensively a bit last year and just hasn't done any sort of three-point shooting. So he will have to take a pretty significant step forward as a three-point shooter to make it to the NBA, but if he can do that, Indiana is going to greatly benefit from that. Overall, though, I think Indiana just needs more consistency from him. Last season, it was obviously his second year where he had some waves, he had some ups and downs. It finished on a really big high, But it's that level of play he had in the Wyoming game, some of the Big Ten tournament games. Indiana needs him at. They don't need the highs and the lows. They need straight consistency. So if he can consistently be a reliable defender who can knock down a couple threes a game, just simple stuff like that, be an above average rebounder for his size at 6'6", be that crazy leaper that can make the jaw-dropping plays. If you know what you can get from him from a night-to-night basis, he's going to see more minutes, being a known quantity like that. I'm excited for Geronimo. I'm excited to watch him put people on posters, maybe slam the ball off the ground and score another basket this season. One of the most bizarre plays I've ever seen. But I am excited to watch him this season. We'll see how everything pans out for him. There's a lot of guys you could call X factors on this team. Potentially he could be one if he does kind of turn the corner as a perimeter player. Be a big ask after he didn't do it a lot last season. It's a lot different going from being a stretch forward to kind of a small forward perimeter focused player. So it's a tall task, but we'll see if he can do it and really positively change the outlook of Indiana's season. Race Thompson, much more of a known quantity, much more consistent, reliable. We'll talk about what to expect from him in his final year, presumably at Indiana. Before we dive into that, though, guys, sweat is not something anyone finds fun to talk about. It's embarrassing. There's nothing worse than being on a first date. You know, you reach for a glass of water and your sweaty armpits have left a ring on your shirt. It's embarrassing. You know they're there. You're hoping the date doesn't know they're there. It's just awful. So we have a product for you that can help you guys with those embarrassing moments. It's called Sweat Block. Sweat Block is very simple antiperspirant wipe that you apply the night before. If it's underarm sweat, you just apply it under your arm, wait about 5 minutes, let it air out, go to bed, wake up the next morning, wash the affected area, you're set to go, no more sweat. I promise it works. I'm someone who uses it. I'm someone who is a very sweaty person who can attest to what Sweat Block can do. Sweat Block gives you the confidence to wear what you want without that embarrassing underarm sweat. The Sweat Block wipes were tested and featured on the Rachel Race show by firefighters. If you or someone you love is experiencing some of that embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweat Block. Save 20% off with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. Also available on Amazon. Race Thompson, just like Jordan Geronimo, was someone the Hoosiers had to wait on a kind of decision from, but a big, not necessarily get for Indiana, but big that he is sticking around with the Hoosiers, gives them another very talented forward, a lot of experience, and someone very familiar playing alongside Trayce Jackson-Davis. We talked about that, especially early in the season. You can tell those two have an understanding after years and years and years of playing alongside one another. It shows in a number of ways on the court. But Race Thompson really kind of made a name for himself last season. It's the biggest role he's had, 28.5 minutes, started 35 games. He averaged 11.1 points, career high, 7.5 rebounds, career high, and 1.4 blocks, a career high, all in 28 minutes per game. There were some downsides to his play, but overall, he was very reliable. Came up big in some situations where Trayce was out with foul trouble. He came up big in a lot of those situations. And IU wouldn't have gotten to where they ended up without him. That being said, he really struggled at the end of the season last year, I thought. I don't know if it was wear and tear. I don't know if it was also kind of his role changing as IU became more and more of a pick and roll team with Xavier and Trayce. It kind of forced Race to move out to the corner, out to the 3-point line later in the season, and the end result was him struggling to shoot the ball and kind of thusly struggling to make an impact. As we said, over the course of the season, 35 games, he scored 11 points, 7.5 rebounds, 1.6 three-pointers per game. If you look at the last 8 games, which starts with the game at Minnesota, the Rutgers game, the game at Purdue, and then tournament, he played 8 games, scored 7.8 points with 6.3 rebounds, but attempted or shot 36.4% from the 3-point line. There were a number of games in there where he attempted 4 threes against Purdue, a couple threes against Illinois. He knocked them both down. Those were both big. A couple threes against Wyoming, a 3 against St. Mary's. His 3-point attempts went up in Big Ten play, 1.8 over the final 18 games. It probably also isn't a coincidence that it felt like his impact kind of wavered during those final games as well. Early in the season, him and Trayce were playing so well off one another. Race was making big impacts offensively. I don't think his energy level ever waned defensively, but offensively, he went from being, I don't want to say a force necessarily, but someone that you could rely upon to, down the stretch, someone who struggled a bit more. And I thought was struggling to kind of find his way in the new offense. If you look at the final first 17 games of the season, you see someone who, I'm trying to get it pulled up here if Sports Reference will allow it, but someone who felt a lot more involved, 11 points, 7.5 rebounds, but he only shot 13% from 3, but attempted 7.5 shots per game. So he was certainly less involved as the season went along. That's kind of the question I have for him is, how does he get involved with this offense? Because Trayce clearly wants to run more pick and roll with Xavier Johnson. He made that known. I would imagine it's going to happen. Where does that leave Race? Is he going to be someone that's relegated out to the corner to be a 3-point shooter? Can he find a way to make it work alongside Trayce in the dunker spot? Kind of moving around into the mid-post a little bit. How does that work? What does his role in the offense look like now if they are going to go to something more spread out, ball screen heavy, or more ball screen favorable, I guess? He needs to be more of a presence offensively, though, or relative to the end of the season. He's someone that the Hoosiers need scoring from him. He can do it in the low post. He has to continue to stay engaged and involved and aggressive in that area, no matter how many threes he's going to end up taking this year, which I would imagine is going to be more than the 55 he took last year. He's going to need to be impactful on the offensive end for the Hoosiers to be at their best. The good news is, as I said, his defense never really wavered. He was a strong defender from beginning of the season to the end. There were times that he took even some bigger-sized small forwards and matched up with them, but if there was someone like an E.J. Liddell, we saw in that home meeting, Race Thompson took him out of the game. So he's a type of defender that you can put on a team's best forward, or as long as they're not a Zach Edey type of center, even the team's best center, allow him to play that defense on the quote-unquote better player. It also allows Trayce to roam a bit more defensively and be that rim protector. Two very important things. So it's not a coincidence that IU was a really good defensive team, and Race Thompson was a starter last season. Trayce gets a lot of credit for his defense. Race was also really good, I thought, last season. And if he can continue that level of defense, then I'm confident in Indiana at least being competitive on most nights. And if he can bring something to the floor offensively, Indiana is going to be really good this season. So, two very valuable wing players, or forwards, I should say, that are going to see a lot of minutes for the Hoosiers this season. So, thanks again, guys, for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. We'll be back with you tomorrow with a special guest to talk women's basketball in the Big Ten, top 40 players in the Big Ten for women's basketball. I'm excited for that one. For your next listen now, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Follow us on Twitter if you have not already. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a rating and review. All that fun stuff. Most importantly, though, guys, have a terrific Wednesday. Hope you get through the middle of the week. And as always, LEO.